What's happening, party people? Welcome to Blues Lawyer Confessional. This is Jack.
And I'm Matt Esquire.
So, Matt, a couple weeks ago, more than a couple weeks ago, KDH released a video relaying allegations that George Lynch made, suggesting that Peavey Amps was using prison labor to build their amps. Is a small segment of a 45-minute video on a different channel. KDH released a follow-up with a Peavey response email. KDH's video was irresponsible and wrong. KDH makes lots of good videos. The Andertons video, fantastic. Got to the bottom of it. These videos, with more than 150,000 views, were not those videos. I want to talk about these, Matt, from a logic standpoint. And then I'd like you to drop the grenade of the law and just want to make sure that everyone's clear on this record. Does that sound good, Matt?
Sounds fine.
So the first thing I want to get out of the way is that if you like guitar and guitar law and the music industry, and sometimes hearing guitar, you should subscribe. So do that now. Thank you. So Matt, America has an incarceration problem. No one can deny that. However, incarceration is expensive. And so it would seem illogical that the state or a for-profit prison would use their labor forces instead of offsetting state costs like highway construction, building construction, other things that could to be used on a private business that is for-profit, like building amps. It just doesn't smell right. And you'll get into why that's also wrong shortly. Again, it suggests that they'd be using something like Shawshank Redemption style under the table payments, and that just doesn't make sense to me. Just because there are a lot of prisons around the Peavey headquarters does not mean that they are using prison labor. What it means is property values are low, so they can buy a factory to build the things they want to build there. That makes the most sense. Within the video, the first one, around 5:30, 5:38, plus or minus, KDH noted that he couldn't find any evidence.
It's a pretty serious allegation from George, and it's one that's very hard to prove. I've searched high and low to find any reference to this anywhere, and I couldn't find it.
Okay, so 5 minutes into this video, he has no evidence. Absence of evidence is not evidence on its own. So let's be better. KDH noted that George Lynch is probably right because he hasn't gotten in trouble yet, or there's nothing's happened to him, so Peavey isn't suing him.
One thing that does stand out to me, though, is that these allegations have been around for the last 5 years, and if they were false, they'd land George Lynch in some pretty serious trouble. And to my knowledge, George has not found himself in any trouble.
Which is also illogical, because no one cares about George Lynch. The video that you referenced, after you have 150,000 view combo videos about it, has 12,000 views 5 years later. The channel that posted this video has 400 subscribers. The video sounds bad. These are all things that go into my evidence pile that suggest to me that this is not to be taken seriously. And so just because some random person says things, and this random person happens to be George Lynch, fantastic guitar player, by the way, but just because someone says something on YouTube or in an interview or in a podcast does not make it true on the surface. He's just saying things. And our friend George Lynch, Matt, he has a track record of just saying things. We were discussing this before I hit record, but he's saying things about Don Dokken. He run through lead singers in the Lynch Mob, many singers. He stated that the Lynch Mob name was problematic and inexcusable, and then later excused himself and brought the name back. So this is someone who just says things. And so we shouldn't take this at face value when he says something 5 years ago in a podcast. Doesn't mean anything, but the damage has been done, right? A popular YouTuber has said things, and then here we are. Matt, you and I are in the same Peavey Facebook groups. Every time someone says something, they're like, well, it looks like they used prison labor on that. And it's accepted as a thing that exists in the universe now, and that was irresponsible. Matt?
Well, I mean, there are things that need to be established timeline-wise, just baseline things. Now, when was this interview?
It was in 2018, so about
2018. Okay,
5.5 years ago.
right. So 5.5 years ago. There's a very good reason why Peavey has not come out and sued George Lynch for it. A very simple one. If they did sue him, they would sue him for defamation. That's the general theory. It might be slander, it might be libel, but the point is that's the general theory they would go with, called a tort. Specifically, it's an intentional tort. I'm not well versed in Mississippi law or Alabama. I don't know where their statute of limitations work, but most states, intentional torts, the statute of limitations is 1 year. So you have 1 year from that statement to sue. What are the chances that Peavey saw it? If Peavey didn't see it within a year of it being posted, assuming that George Lynch is the one who posted it, it's just way out of the statute of limitations. So it's got traction now. Hey, that's great. But it's still past statute of limitations. The abbreviation for statute of limitations, we abbreviate it SOL, and it's no coincidence that that's the same abbreviation as shit out of luck. So that's the number one, elephant in the room, is they're probably just way outside the statute. But even more importantly, going to the meat of the matter, regardless of whether or not they could sue, when exactly was this prison labor being used? Because Peavey got themselves in a ton of self-inflicted PR hurt way back in 2014 when they did their Undercover Boss episode. Now, in that episode, they had their factory / warehouse in Meridian, which has had about 100 employees, who they turned around and let go so they could finish offshoring. There's virtually no manufacturing of Peavey amplifiers.
I believe the KDH noted that the suggestion from George Lynch was in like 2003 to 2005 timeline, because again KDH referenced the Penta, which I have, and that's when the years it was built, and then the Triple X, which he claimed would have been a George Lynch signature, which is one of the modes in the Penta, by the way. It's the mode number 5 is the Triple X. So go get yourself a Penta. It's a good amp. Okay, back to you, Matt.
I've got no need for a Penta. I'm very happy with my Classic 30 back there.
That's mode number 2, Matt. It's just fine.
But I mean, again,
for me it's 1. I don't know.
Even then, even back in the early 2000s, they had already begun offshoring into China, out to China. Why are they doing this weird split where they're doing manufacturing in that factory warehouse in Meridian and they're doing stuff out in China? It's not adding up. It's one or the other. On top of that, and we had discussed this isn't the sort of thing that you're going to find prison labor for. I mean, yeah, you could have them building cabinets, I guess, but again, isn't that what you would have done out in China? You import that and then you do the assembly here in America, which actually,
exactly,
a lot of companies have gotten called out for, including, I believe, Peavey got called out for one time labeling their stuff as made in USA. It was assembled in the USA, and they had to later backtrack and say designed in, which you want to know how many people do that. I mean, Apple's been doing that for years. They say if you look way back on the back of iPods, because that's how old I am, it said designed in Cupertino. Well, yeah, and it was manufactured at the Foxconn plant out in China. So
I don't see how they're using prison labor without being on some sort of registry. Matt, is there a register or government log of companies doing business with the Mississippi penal system?
Yeah, I mean, this sort of stuff, it gets logged. There's FOIA requests that you can do. It's tracked by all sorts of nonprofits who do track this stuff. By and large, far and away, the biggest user or the biggest use of prison labor isn't private companies using them for factory work. It's government work projects, things like repaving roads, litter pickup, city beautification, that sort of stuff. And if you've ever driven down in the South, there's a good chance you've seen them. I know Georgia still puts them in the striped pajamas on the chain gangs, and they will have them picking up litter on the highway. And yeah, you can see it happen. It still goes on. That's the big user of it. I'm just not seeing them as being a big enough company to be like going after a government contract like that. I just, you don't just knock on the front door of the, Mississippi State Pen and say, hey, can I borrow some of your guys to do some light soldering? The fact that Peavey doesn't sue, that's proof of nothing other than the fact that they probably just didn't even know that George Lynch made these claims.
Well, Matt, I think we've proven that Peavey did not use prison labor on their amps.
Or at the very least, that it's not bloody likely that they did.
Less fiddling, more
playing.
playing.